He said I wouldn't survive without him, and I proved him otherwise. My name is Débora. I'm 36 years old, and for many years I was known simply as Marcelo's wife. I say this because, for a long time, I practically disappeared within my own marriage. When we married, I was 24 and full of dreams. I wanted to finish my psychology degree, open a practice, and maybe one day write a book. Marcelo was a little older, successful, and at first, he made me feel special. But over time, the glow of our relationship gave way to a heavy shadow, and I barely noticed when I set aside everything I was to live exclusively for him. Before I knew it, it had been almost 10 years since I'd been the protagonist of my own life. In the beginning, things weren't so clear. He was always very confident, and I, a little more insecure, ended up confusing control with care. Marcelo told me how to dress, who I should hang out with, what I should study, all disguised as good intentions. And I, wanting to please, gave in. I dropped out of college halfway through, distanced myself from my friends, and started working in a business he started, but never really let me run. He said I was too emotional to handle important decisions. Little by little, I became convinced that maybe he was right, that maybe I really wasn't that capable. Over time, I faded away. I stopped dressing up, smiling, dreaming. Every choice I made was met with disapproval, with sarcastic looks or comments. He called me overreacting when I cried, ungrateful when I complained. And oddly enough, I still felt guilty. I thought the problem was me, that I didn't know how to be a good wife. When I thought about leaving the marriage, I was terrified of being alone, of being judged by my family, of starting over from scratch. My parents always said that marriage was forever, and that a woman who leaves must be very cool-headed. So I stayed. I suppressed my desires, stifled my inner cries, accepting crumbs of affection as if they were banquets. Things took a turn for the worse when he lost a major contract and began taking out all his frustration on me. Criticism became insults. Silence became a constant punishment. He would go days without speaking to me when I did something that displeased him. I began experiencing anxiety attacks, insomnia, and a fatigue that wouldn't go away even with rest. I'd look in the mirror and barely recognize myself. The Débora who dreamed, who laughed, who wanted to help people, had disappeared. And still, I couldn't break free. I felt weak, trapped in a cycle of fear, shame, and emotional dependence. One day, something inside me snapped. I was making dinner and dropped a glass on the floor. Marcelo was so enraged that he threw the plate I'd prepared against the wall and yelled that I wasn't even fit to be a housewife. I stood there, silent, staring at the scattered shards. In that moment, something changed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't apologize. I just felt a huge void. And within that void, a spark of clarity. It wasn't the first time he'd belittled me like that, but it was the first time I didn't blame myself for it. It was as if, finally, I'd seen who he really was. In the following days, I began to move in silence. I reconnected with an old friend who worked as a psychologist and scheduled a session. During my first appointment, I cried almost the entire time, but I left with a strange sense of relief, as if, for the first time in years, someone had truly listened to me. I remained hidden, going to sessions without his knowledge, while I gathered the courage to make a decision. I began to write down everything I felt, listing the moments I had been silenced, the dreams I had abandoned, the limits I had crossed out of fear. Every line in that notebook was an attempt to reclaim my lost identity. It took me almost 6 months to finally say out loud that I wanted to separate. And even then, when I did, my voice trembled. Marcelo laughed, mocked, said, I wouldn't survive even a month without him. And deep down, that sentence hurt, because for a long time, I believed it too. But in that moment, something inside me said, try. Even if you're scared, try. And that's what I did. I moved in with a cousin, taking only a few clothes and documents. I started selling candy to order to raise money. It wasn't easy. I had days of despair, of crying into my pillow, of wanting to go back just to avoid feeling so much pain. But with each day away from him, something in me was reborn. I began to take care of myself, to walk down the street without fear of being dressed wrongly, to talk to people without fear of being inconvenient. I began to look at myself in the mirror with more kindness, to remember the things that made me happy. Psychotherapy was essential, but what helped me most was realizing I wasn't alone. I joined online support groups and saw that other women were also rebuilding themselves after abusive relationships. Those stories gave me strength, and little by little, I began writing my own. One of the most symbolic moments of this phase was when I bought my first office chair with the money from selling candy. It may seem silly, but it was as if I said to myself, "You're building something of your own, from scratch, with your own hands." That chair wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was the beginning of my independence. Over time, I began investing in online courses and returned to studying psychology, albeit in a very modest way. With each class, I felt like I was recapturing that version of Débora who once wanted to be a therapist, who wanted to listen, help, and transform. Of course, there were setbacks. There were days when I looked at old photos and wondered if I'd done the right thing. Sometimes I missed him less, and more the illusion of a life I thought I'd have. I wondered if people were judging me, if my parents were disappointed. But over time, I learned to filter, to realize that much of what bothered me wasn't my fault, but the result of years of being molded to please, to be acceptable. And it was liberating to understand that I could make mistakes, that I could be frustrated, that I could start over, and still be worthy of love and respect. The most painful part was dealing with the triggers. Words, smells, music, anything could transport me back to that kitchen, to that cold gaze, to that feeling of being invisible. But it was also in those moments that I grew the most. Instead of running from the pain, I learned to embrace it, to understand that it was part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I had crises, of course, but I didn't hide from them. I asked for help when I needed it. I accepted company when I wanted to isolate myself. I discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the daily decision not to let fear paralyze me. A major turning point came when one of my support group colleagues invited me to participate in a discussion about abusive relationships. At first, I was reluctant. I thought I had nothing to say, that my story was too small. But when I sat in that circle and shared my experience, I realized my voice had value. I saw women crying, others identifying themselves, some writing down the name of the therapist who helped me. There, for the first time, I felt that perhaps my pain could become a seed of healing for someone. From then on, something clicked. I started writing short texts about my experience, posting some on social media, and receiving messages from women saying, "It feels like you wrote my story." This deeply moved me. Not that I wanted to live through pain, but turning pain into a bridge was what kept me going. I realized that what hurt me most, deep down, was feeling alone. And now, by sharing, I was helping others not feel alone. Empathy became my compass. And little by little, I reconnected with the mission I once wanted to pursue. After 2 years away from that marriage, I managed to rent a small apartment of my own. Every corner of that place was put together with effort, patience, and a lot of pride. I painted the walls light yellow, put plants in the window, and scattered post-it notes with phrases that reminded me of who I was. You are enough. You don't need anyone's approval to flourish. You deserve the love you give. It wasn't a life of luxury, but it was my life. For the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully, unafraid of silence, unafraid of myself. My relationship with solitude has also changed. Before, I dreaded Sundays, those long days when everything seemed still and silent. But now, I've learned to fill them with things that make me feel good. I started cooking while listening to my favorite music, walking in the park near my house, drinking coffee alone on the porch with a book in my hands. I discovered that the company that healed me most was my own. It was in this reconnection with myself that I understood something fundamental. True. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want, but feeling at peace with who you are, even on the quietest days. The last time I met Marcelo was by chance, in a supermarket line. He looked me up and down and said, "I never imagined you'd do so well." I just smiled and replied, "Neither did I, but now I know I can do even better." And I left with a light heart, not because he recognized anything, but because I no longer needed his validation, or anyone's, to know my worth. Then, I knew for sure, the woman he'd tried to erase was back, and this time, to stay. Today, I look back and understand how much it took losing myself to find myself again. It wasn't pretty, nor was it quick. It was a painful process, full of falls, setbacks, and days when I could barely get out of bed. But it was also a real process. And that's what I want other women to understand. There's no magic formula. there's decision. The decision to not accept less than you deserve. The decision to start even when you're scared, even when you don't have support, even when your heart is broken. The decision to keep going even when everything seems too difficult. Because in the end, self-love doesn't come all at once. It's built in the details of everyday life. I revived old dreams and created new ones. I returned to college, this time determined to see it through. I'm in my 4th year of psychology, and if all goes well, I want to open a therapeutic space for women who have experienced abusive relationships. Not to save anyone, no one saves anyone, but to offer listening, support, and paths forward. Because I know firsthand how much it hurts to have no one to share your pain with. I've also started writing regularly again. I have a small but very special blog where I share articles about new beginnings, self-esteem, and emotional freedom. I learned to love myself in practice, to forgive myself for staying so long in a place that hurt me, to understand that loving someone doesn't mean destroying yourself for them. That love, when it's true, never diminishes. It elevates. Today, I know I deserve more, not just in relationships, but in everything. I deserve respect, a voice, space, choices, and most importantly, I deserve my own company. Because in the end, what saved me wasn't someone coming to rescue me. It was the woman I became after realizing I was already whole. I had only been taught to feel half. If I could speak to the Débora of 10 years ago, I would say, it will hurt, but it will be worth it. You're not crazy, nor weak. You're just tired of pretending everything is okay. And it's okay to admit that. It's okay to start over. Because that's exactly how my new life began. With a sincere admission that I wasn't okay. From then on, everything changed. Not overnight, but with every step. With every no, I had the courage to say. Every time I chose myself, even when the world expected me to give in. The scars still exist. Sometimes they sting when the weather changes, especially when I find myself in situations where I need to reaffirm my boundaries. But today I know they don't shame me. They tell a story of survival, a story of someone who once believed she couldn't do it, but did, who believed she was too broken, but rebuilt herself, who thought her love was too big to contain alone, and then discovered that self-love was exactly what she'd been searching for all along. I think the greatest lesson from this journey is that no one teaches us how to return home when that home so is ourselves. We learn through pain, through stumbles, through attempts. And when we finally find that inner home again, everything changes. Choices change, relationships change, our outlook on life changes. I no longer seek someone to complete me. I seek someone who overflows with me. I no longer live to please. I live to be whole. And whoever wants to be by my side, let them come and add to me, never to take me away. If you're reading this and feel trapped in a relationship that diminishes you, I want to tell you that you're not alone, that there is a way out, even if it seems impossible today, and that you don't have to be completely ready to leave. You just have to be willing to choose yourself, one step at a time, even with fear, even with doubts, even with pain, but moving forward, because there's a beautiful life on the other side of fear, and it's waiting for you, just like it was waiting for me. Today, when I close my eyes and think about the Débora I was and the woman I've become, I feel proud, I feel peace, and above all, I feel hope. Because if I could get out of where I was and build everything anew, then so can many others. I'm not a heroine, nor an example of perfection. I'm just someone who decided to no longer accept a life I didn't fit into. And it was with that decision that I was reborn. Not by magic, but by courage. The courage to finally be who I've always been.